Okay, welcome everybody. Sorry if I have a bit of a scratchy voice today. It's allergy season here, and I've been hit hard, so I apologize in advance. Welcome. It's April 15th Embedded SIG meeting. I'm going to run the show today because Dominic, I believe, is on a train and may join us, but likely will not have good connectivity. Let's see. Do we have anybody who can take notes? That would be super helpful. Anybody willing to take notes?
I can do it.
Perfect. Thank you. Is that Thomas?
Yeah.
Okay. So first agenda item will be to go through the recap from last time, which includes some recap of the WASI conference. Are there any additional agenda items that people want to talk about today? Anything specific? Okay.
Hi, this is Shiv here. Myself and Ashish, we are from Collins in RTX company. So we wanted to. This is our second meeting. We are new in this group. Our interest is WASM and primarily WASM for low throughput devices, primarily microcontrollers, and we were looking for WASI interfaces primarily on CAN, I2C, SPI, GPIOs. We have seen some examples in phase 0 or phase 1. So we would be looking to contribute something for CAN and other interfaces, which we are regularly using in our embedded applications.
Okay.
So we would probably reach out to the group if we need some help. To get started on some of these activities.
Good. I think CAN is an area where I think several of us have looked at and have some interest. So I think that would be very, very welcome.
Thank you. Sure.
So why don't we do this? Why don't I read through the notes from last time, go over that, discuss any of the questions folks have, and then if you want to talk a little bit more about your thoughts on CAN and what you're trying to do and what help you would like, that might be a good opportunity to solicit some help. Okay, any other agenda items? Okay, well, I will go through the notes from last time.
Sorry, I might have just bringing over the message from the component model meeting last week. So there's some announcement on WASI P2, WASI P3, sorry, WASI 0.3. So if you are interested, I would just summarize what was said there.
That would be excellent, because I think the last embedded, the WASI SG meeting was canceled due to WASM-IO, so we didn't have that. So it'd be good to get an update on that. Yes, perfect. Okay. Perfect. Notes from last time. So the call on April 1st was mostly a discussion on two topics. I would say actually 4 topics. The first was a recap of WASM-IO. So WASM-IO happened at the end of last month in Barcelona. I believe all of the videos are largely now available on YouTube. If you go to the WASM-IO YouTube channel. I didn't check to see all of them. I saw them trickle in about a week ago. So I think they're all there. Lots of good presentations. Definitely worth going to look at. One of the things that was discussed by myself and a number of folks from the E-SIG with everybody there at WASM-IO was the idea of an LTS. For those of you who are not familiar with the idea was to see what could be done to provide long-term support in the WASI ecosystem. The thinking is that while the WASI 0.2 and now WASI 0.3 is making a lot of strides and coming along nicely. It's still a ways away from being something that's production ready. And at the moment, there are a number of folks, many folks on this call, who have devices in the field that are running WASI P1. And so the idea is like, well, what can we do to provide a good support system, and then a path to whatever ultimately becomes, WASI, WASI RC or WASI 1.0. And so the idea of doing an LTS is something that has been discussed and has a lot of support from a lot of folks, both on the embedded SIG as well as from the wider WASI subgroup. And so a lot of discussions as to what it really means, what it includes. The thinking is that it would include the scope of WASI P1 as it exists today, plus the things that are commonly already in use. Most common are WASI sockets and WASI threads. Those tend to be implemented across all of the WebAssembly runtimes. More importantly, though, the LTS is to be a discussions around LTS was to provide something that provides true long-term support. So something on the order of 5 or 10 years of support. It's not to build new features or a competing spec. The idea is to provide stability around the existing P1 tool chains and then a path forward. And so that includes the elements related to what the WASI interfaces are, their implementation, so implementations in runtime such as WAMR, which is used mostly by the embedded folks, as well as the tool chain. And I think that last point, the tool chain, is probably one of the most important things that we probably need to focus on. It's one thing to continue to use something like WAMR, which has good WASI P1 support, but if the compiler and tool chain move to the component model and can no longer provide P1 binaries, or no one is providing support and patching and bug fixes for those, that's going to be a problem for those of us that are currently using P1. And so the tool chain and supporting that, and including WASI SDK, WASI libc, is a huge part of that effort. And so that's something else that was discussed. And again, the idea is not to create a standard. This would not go through the W3C standardization process. This would not be a new standard or substandard of WASI. It would be an effort around taking what exists today and then obviously providing stability and support for everything. Myself, I'm working on mapping what works today in P1 and what doesn't work, and what gaps there are. I will need people's help with that. I'm not ready to share my chart yet, because there's still a lot of work that I need to do. But the idea is to figure out what works and what doesn't work. For example, WASI sockets is supported on WAMR. But that's not fully supported across all the embedded operating systems, for example. Zephyr, there's the number of things that are not supported yet. So I'm mapping all of that out, and I'm definitely going to need people's help to go do that. Let's see. One of the other things that Chris talked about at length was this is going to require resources. One of the issues that we have today in supporting this is most of the people that are supporting this are well, everybody's basically volunteers. No one's paid to do this. And so if you look at something, for example, like WASI libc, there's only 2 or 3 really active developers today contributing to that. Dan has done a great job, Dan from Fastly, Pat Hickey as well. And I'm forgetting a whole bunch of other folks, but they've been doing a lot of work. But if we're wanting to do anything around supporting this long-term and supporting this long-term for P1, there's going to need to be resources committed from all the organizations. So Chris is working on what that structure should look like. The current thinking is that there would be some sort of memorandum of understanding that various different organizations would sign, and basically it's not a contract, it's not binding, but it's a way to signal that we're providing true support, and organizations will be providing resources. If organizations within the E-SIG can each provide, a half or a full-time equivalent for the next 6 months or a year, that's going to provide a lot of boost and a lot more engineering resources to this effort. And obviously, we need that to continue over the full LTS span. So we've got some future work that Chris is organizing around discussing what we mean truly about WASI P1 LTS what it is, what it's not, and then also how that's going to be organized in some sort of memorandum of understanding. And again, just to wrap WASI up a little bit, this was discussed with everybody, Luke, Bailey, a bunch of other folks, Oscar, and many other discussions, and there seems to be a lot of support behind that. So I think is good. Any questions on this? I know folks from Asia, you didn't probably participate in the last E-SIG call, and many were not at WASM.io. So this might be new to folks in Asia. Any questions, any thoughts, anything I might have missed?
Hello, this is Ron. So
Hey, Ron.
just, I did mention this last time, just as a follow-up, but just for those, Luke and other people who are obviously deeply involved with WASI design moving forward expressed a very strong philosophy about compatibility, in the sense that WASI P1 and P2, you can just keep using P1. It's never being deprecated. It's never going away. So this is not about that. This is more, I think, about the ecosystem necessary to actually support production usage of these things, and not so much, oh, we're concerned about the standard itself. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I just thought that might be an important point to make.
It is a good point. I think there is some subtlety here. I think in some ways the idea would be that everything eventually moves to the component model, and in that world, the WASI P1 interfaces would likely go away. That sounds much worse than it is, because the intent is that, well, that code was linked against something like, say, WASI libc, and now WASI libc is no longer based on P1, it's been rebased on P2, right? So you get source level compatibility between that. So I think in some ways, the P1 interfaces will eventually go away. And I think the 0.2 interfaces will eventually go away, and the 0.3 eventually will go away, because they'll eventually be replaced by WASI 1.0. Right? They stay around for compatibility reasons, so people have time to migrate their code. But so that's one, I would say, subtlety. The other thing I would say, though, is you're spot on about LTS being about making this production ready, right? Even when we get to WASI 1.0, we still need the concepts of things like an LTS to support this long term, right? From a tool chain perspective, from a compiler perspective, from a runtime perspective. And so there's a bunch of different efforts. And so I think this WASI P1 LTS is probably the start of making things production ready, and doing it on what we have today and what is working today. So,
since we do have a lot of members of the actual WAMR team here, maybe we should ask this in the form of a question of some of them as far as how they perceive it, just because I'm really curious. And hello, by the way.
I think that's a great suggestion. Anybody from the WAMR team want to weigh in on their thoughts?
Hi, I'm Xing Wang. I'm from Intel. Maybe I can start with my side.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and last week we had a discussion with Thomas and Chris, and also we in some kind of a meeting with another community participant, Xiaomi company. They so we also introduced the LTS proposal for the P1. Currently for our side, Intel, we the LTS P1 LTS is a very valuable for our product. So we are now based on the P1. So we need long-term support for P1 tool chain. So we are supportive to that. And also we got feedback from Xiaomi. They are also supportive. But for Intel, if we talk about any kind of company level signing or commitment, that will be some process to go through, and we don't have a we're not sure so how long and whether or not it can be approved, but we will try.
Good. I imagine most companies are going to have some sort of challenge around, formal commitments, and I think that is one of the challenges that Chris is trying to do. It's somewhat I don't think it's an interesting thing because again, all of our companies have committed to support via, say, like the Bytecode Alliance already. So, so some are questioning like, well, do we need another commitment? And so I think whether that's a memorandum of understanding, just an agreement, or just raw participation, I think we're gonna have to sort what that is over the next few weeks. I think the biggest thing in my mind, the biggest concern I have is, are people willing to provide resources to help staff this? Obviously, Intel, you're providing a lot on the Whammer side as a Xiaomi and many others. And so I don't see that changing. I don't see that diminishing. I think what we're really trying to do is get a lot of other people as well to support that. Because if we want stability for this tool chain, we want something we can support and build into our products. We want a community around that is actually going to provide that support. And so we need participants. And again, if you look at something like libc, there's not a lot of active participants there. And anything we can add to that is going to be better. Like if we get 2 people who are really excited about WASI libc and start doing work there, that's a potential almost 50% increase in active contributors. So
we see this is a really important topic, and Intel has kind of invested in this project, the Whammer, for many years, and but a health community should have a kind of a support from many companies, like particularly to have a, I mean, if particularly it is very important to have a dedicated resource working on the open source project. We saw that some many companies are building products with the open source, and the whole schedule is around the product kind of milestone. So when they're working on that, they can put many people, but when the product development is finished, then mostly are gone. So hopefully, so if you have a product really long, have a kind of long-term dependence on those open source project, maybe have a one or half kind of resource on the open source project will be very helpful for the long run.
I agree, and I think if you look at open source communities, everybody wants to point at Linux, and Linux is somewhat of a unique in that regard because the community is so large and it's led by a number of really folks that are 100% dedicated to this, right? And so that provides that resourcing, and I think many organizations build upon Linux, and they've not necessarily had to give back, right? There's just a huge community there. When you look at smaller efforts, that is not always the case, right? I think a few years back we saw what happened with I believe it was Heartbleed, where a bunch of folks were dependent on OpenSSL and realized that, wait, there's only like one person who maintains this globally, and we've all built software on top of it. And there was a bug there, and we can't blame that person because that's not their day job. And I think that shined a light on the fact that not all of these communities are the same. And that's not to say OpenSSL is bad. It's just it's just a different situation, right? And so I think for us to have healthy open source projects that we can count on, we need to have a healthy ecosystem of contributors and foster people to join and contribute. To that end, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but can you talk about how many active contributors are participating in WAMR and how many of those are outside of Intel?
That can be easily to get the information from the contributor GitHub website contributors.
Okay.
They are.
Go ahead.
Maybe half to half. So Intel have a half to half, but the outside Intel contributors is not might not be dedicated to WAMR. They are mostly aligned to their product kind of plan and the milestone. That means when their product is finished, then they have a less kind of attention or focus on the open source project.
I think that's pretty normal. I also know it in that way that if you use an open source software somewhere in your project, then you are contributing and then committing to it for the things that you need for your project. Once the project is done, you move on, kind of, right? I think that's pretty normal, pretty standard. So if you want to have a commitment for a dedicated resource for WAMR or for the LLVM WASM backend or the WASI libc, then you must make this or announce it as a kind of a project by itself because you have a business interest in it. And this is something that needs to be aligned in every organization.
And I'm kind of thinking to communicate with starting from the big companies. So maybe it is possible to have a 1 or 0.5 resource can be dedicated. No matter what's the current state of the project. That would be very healthy for the open source, because the open source need a kind of a focus and for a long time.
I think some of this is also awareness, just like, the whole OpenSSL Heartbleed thing was an awareness of how little people were providing, how few resources were there providing support for that. And I think in many cases, a lot of people were probably unaware they were using OpenSSL. They were using some other package that used OpenSSL. To bring that analogy here, I think people don't realize that there's a whole chain of things we need that we rely on, right? We talk about the spec and the interfaces. That's what a lot of things happen in the WASI SG and in a lot of the working groups. But at the end of the day, it needs to be implemented in something, whether that be WASM time or WAMR, right? And so those are the obvious ones. I use WAMR. But then even WAMR, personally, we use WAMR on top of Zephyr primarily, right? That support is not as good as it is on Linux. It's not as good as it is on some other operating systems, such as Windows or NetX or some of the other platforms that are supported. So there's that. But then there's the whole tool chain. There's LLVM, there's the compiler, right? That's pretty mature. That's been providing code for a while, but obviously as new features come out, custom page sizes, for example, that's not, that's just merged a few weeks ago, right? And so that's not yet in all the mainline code, and it's not supported in some of the runtimes. So when you want to use some of those features, you read about it in the spec, and you have to wait until that trickles through that tool chain. The biggest thing for me was WASI libc. I've looked at like, hey, why does this function not work for me? Or why does this particular thing not provide support for this? And I was like, oh yeah, it's not an implemented WASI libc. Oh, there's a bug in WASI libc. And I think that's one of those things that's pretty forgotten for a lot of folks, right? You can target WASM 32 WASM unknown, right? But if you're writing in portable code and bringing code over, you're probably got to be bringing libc based code over, and you're dependent on WASI libc and then all the wonderful implementations that are provided there. And there's a number of things that are just not supported in there that could be supported, right? And so when you say, oh, that doesn't work on quote unquote WASI, it's like, oh, well, where doesn't it work? Is it not implemented in the runtime? Is it not provided in the spec? Most likely it's not provided in WASI libc, right? And so I think one of the things that I talked to Chris and I had long discussions about on this topic was just providing awareness of where people can contribute. I think some of the things are obvious, but I think some of them we're going to need a call for like, hey, we need resources to work on this particular set of features. And so those are areas where I think would be really good to get a list of sort of things we need to work on, and then talk about that in this group and help prioritize that. So if there's particular things in the Whammer side that are like, oh my God, we really want to get this out, everybody's asking for it, we just need help, and in this particular area, I think those would be great conversations as in to bring here.
Yeah.
Um,
And
Good.
okay.
go
Regarding to the WASI libc, so we talked about that internally, and we think to give full support of libc for WebAssembly is very important. And by that way, we can have the full C++ ecosystem kind of enabled. So that means when we have any piece of legacy code, we can easily to compile the source code into WebAssembly and run it on the runtime. And no need kind of a change to the source code, like for the dependency on socket or thread or those features. So when
yeah, go ahead.
When we talk about supporting have many languages, but the starting point to have full support over C will be great, because this is a huge community and huge resource. Then we can get much more adoptions for this technology.
I think that last point is key, and it's something that Thomas and I discussed in person in Barcelona. Is the more people that are part of this community, the more people are going to be able to contribute, right? If everybody who uses WebAssembly in what Zen you just said, if only 2% of those people contribute back, right? That seems low. But if that pool of people is tens of thousands of people, then we'll have a lot of resources. So I think the more people that join the community and are able to use this technology, the more resources we'll have from people contributing, which I think is an ultimate goal. One thing about bringing existing code, I agree with you in principle. I think one of the problems that people always have is to strive for 100% compatibility, right? Like, even Linux is not 100% compatible with POSIX and libc and all the other stuff. I think what we mean when we say bring any legacy code and have it just compile, we mean that, hey, I can take any legacy code and have it just compile, and I might have to tweak a few things. I might be like, oh, this platform doesn't have pull, it has ePull, or vice versa, or thread priorities are a little bit different here, and I need to adjust. But I don't have to do a full rewrite or major porting effort. The wording that I've always heard is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I think we want to be really good in our support, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah. I'm not sure it is possible to have the full POSIX API supported on
I don't think so. Yeah.
Zephyr or other embedded operating system. If that can be done, that would be perfect. That means we can use a WebAssembly as a porting layer. But I don't have that much knowledge about the embedded operating system.
It yeah, there's definitely things that are not going to be able to be provided on. Zephyr is probably a little bit of an outlier because Zephyr actually has quite good POSIX support compared to others. But when you look at things like ThreadX and whatnot and FreeRTOS, the support varies, right? And again, I don't think we expect full POSIX. Probably full libc is probably a lot closer to achievability. But good, yeah. So I think we're definitely saying the same things.
Yeah.
So, and one last thing I want to make clear too, I think we need to determine what the path from WASI P1 LTS is to whatever eventually becomes the WASI 1.0 standard and onward. I'm not saying we have to determine that now, but what we have to do is when we say, hey, we're going to kick off this effort, this needs to be part of the guiding goals of that effort to figure out what that story is. Is it source code compatibility? Is it binary compatibility? Is it whatever that might be? Probably something between the two of those, right? Are there additional tooling or adapters that need to be created, converters, etc.?
Yeah.
That needs to be part of that plan because WASI LTS is one thing. Obviously, they'll just like any LTS, you want to move to the next increment when that happens, right? So just like you see with WASI, with the Linux LTS support, or well, actually not Linux LTS, but see things like Ubuntu has an LTS program, for example. Ron, you have your hand up. Go for it.
Thanks. Just quick question to the Intel WAMR maintainers. If you can tell us this, probably, what's your target operating system for the Intel product development that's really driving Intel's participation in this? Since obviously it's not Zephyr, curiously, although Zephyr is Linux Foundation, which is largely funded by Intel Cache. So it's just, can you tell us that?
Do you mean hardware platform or the operating system?
Yeah, are you targeting embedded Linux primarily with WAMR runtime for the product development that's causing Intel to wish to pay your team to put in all this effort?
Yeah. I think is a Zephyr operating system is on some embedded chip.
Ah, so it is Zephyr.
Yeah, is that right, Liang?
Yes.
Yeah.
But just from this year. Before that, it's always the Linux.
Because I imagine Linux on Nux was kind of the target for, but that's why I wish to ask that question.
Yeah, you're right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, feel free to elaborate if you wish. Don't. I'm not. Thank you. By the way.
Here we spend a lot of effort on the some for kind of providing a coding kind of a portable environment or a loadable environment for some kind of constrained environment like the security environment using WebAssembly like SGX into software guard extension, and also many different kind of hardware environments.
Oh, that's right, because you have the enclaves with the software guard.
Yeah.
And that's supported on WAMR?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Thomas, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have. It feels that we are coming to an end with this agenda point because Christoph is also in there, and then wanted to give some announcement on P3. I just wanted to ask about any action items you guys would see for the SIG-Embedded work regarding this LTS idea?
There's lots of work to do. I think Chris has and the co-chairs of SIG-Embedded probably have the biggest action item to figure out what this would look like and put this forward as a proposal for working under our group, and then what that structure should be. So I'd say that would be the one big action item. But I think the second, which is probably more actionable for people here, is for folks to start making a list of what they feel needs to be fixed or needs to be in place. Fixed probably is not the right way to look. What needs to be in place for them to be successful on P1. I'll give you an example. I'm working on something right now where I have a challenge around using sockets on Zephyr for a simple web server, right? And so there's some challenges around that, and how WASI sockets is implemented on WAMR, for example. And so I think if everybody were to build that list to themselves, and then we can bring them together for discussion, because I think one of the challenges with LTS is there's a lot of stuff in P1. There's a lot of things that are in place, and there's a lot of things to be worked on. But unless we prioritize that based on people's needs and people's willingness to contribute, it's almost too big of a problem for people to get started on. And I think one of the things that will be helpful is if we have a good list of, hey, these are the top 10 things people want or need to be put in place. And hey, can somebody help us with these, right? And then people will obviously willingly sign up. Today, if you go to the issues list in WAMR, you go to the issues list in WASI SDK, WASI libc, there's hundreds of open issues, and it's hard to figure out where to get started, right? So it's good we have those all tracked, but they're not all equal in priority. They're not all equal in need. And so what I would say is an action item, if everybody could put together their own list, and then I think I'll take the action item to figure out how we get those lists organized.
Yeah, that's just what I'm looking for. So we have this biweekly SIG-Embedded rotating through the time zones.
Mhm.
So I think it would be good if we could kind of boil down for everyone. It's homework, right? And then as long as we are not set up in a way that we have some platform where we can collect the top 10 needed things of everyone, I think it would be good enough to that every participant writes it down for themselves. What is the most wanted thing they need to have with P1 based approaches? Let's call it in that way, or also for P2 plus or whatsoever, right? So let's boil it down to requirements. What is to be required for every participant, and then just try to align on that and put a comprehensive list on that, and then just let's see what we can do. That would also help in better estimating the needed resources, right, to get a long-term support up and running.
Okay, good. So I agree with that, Thomas. You can put an action item down for me to circle back with everybody and figure out where we can put all those things.
I wrap it up.
Okay.
I write it and then send it to you, and just state it as a call to action for everyone.
Okay, perfect. To wrap up notes from the last meeting as well, the last item that we talked about is also related to Christoph, was WASM on AUTOSAR, or AUTOSAR using WASM. Christoph, I know you presented this to the AUTOSAR consortium. I think you and Chris were going to talk about potentially you setting up a time to give that presentation, or a presentation like that to this group. So if that's still a thing, I think we'd all love to see that. It's good, interesting stuff. It has nothing to do with LTS, but I think it's really good to see this in use and how it could be used in the automotive industry. And with that, if you want to make a couple comments on that and then jump over to WASI 0.3, I think we'd all like to hear where that's going.
Okay, I would like to swap the order. So just starting about with WASI P3, because that's I just wrote down some points to just give a quick update there. So last week in the component model meeting, there was an announcement that the commercial deadline, there was previously a commercial deadline on finishing WASI P3 within the first quarter of this year. And that deadline is gone. So the funding is actually extended. That being said, everybody agreed that it should still be ready as soon as possible. And if you want to take a closer look at what's currently happening there, so the guest side is mostly stable. There is some working on actually polishing some edges there, mostly about thread handling or how exactly streams and futures map to their on-wire representation. So this was basically being worked on, and I just put a link in the chat, which is a WASM time fork. This is where most of the current development is happening in WASI P3. And I just wrote down, so they just separated the objects for future and streams. So basically now there's a reading end and a writing end for a stream, which previously there was a single object, so a single ID. And this enables future optimizations and further things. So basically it really feels like, okay, they have a working prototype and now they're really taking a closer look, a step back, and want to see, well, if we really want to make this stable, where exactly are the pain points, and is there some way of just fixing it quickly? Also, the asynchronous host APIs, which are very important for getting WASM time really easy to use with WASI P3 is being worked on, and I see a lot of code cleanup and testing, installation, and all these things. Right now, the testing infrastructure is not as good as it could be because of the basically the interdependency between the code generator, the runtime, any WASI proposals, and so on. So there's a lot of things which actually need to be updated in parallel, and this is not easy and difficult to coordinate. And also subtests, subtest handling is being cleaned up. So some of the intrinsics which are used there are being reworked, some return types and similar things. So basically signature adjustments in the very, very deep down in the implementation space. So this was quite good news. Well, mixed news. I would like to see WASI P3 being really standardized and finalized quite soon. But seeing that funding is not stopped, there's some time to go on, and they're really polishing the edges. It feels everything I see there just I can instantly relate to. So it's really improving the overall product there. Any questions so far to the P3? So I'm not a speaker of the P3, but I happen to be intimately related to the component model, so that's why I'm.
One question about you said there was a commercial deadline in finishing P3 in Q1, right?
Yep.
And that it got extended.
Yes.
What does this extension mean? Is it extended until it's finished, or is it extended until 3 months? Or can you give a little bit more insights on that?
I don't have much more insights on that one. So,
okay.
But it feels like it's for sure extended for the foreseeable future to really get P3 in a good shape.
Okay, great.
And it did not sound like the people are just aiming for the next half of the year, but much more for the next weeks. So I assume there was some last time issue or last time issues cropping up, and they really felt that okay, we cannot finish it in time, but we really want to do it right.
Cool.
So it's quite I've been implementing the Streams and Future API without WASM. So basically just using native compilation, but still using WIT generated code. And that is working well, quite well as well. So it's this is also the one I presented to AutoSAR. Basically, it's a twofold approach. One is we really want to get some sort of standardized interface between components in AutoSAR. So really going to forward to componentization of AutoSAR and having language neutral interfaces there. And there, WASI 0.3 is a natural fit because it supports 95% of the data types which is used by AutoSAR.
So is one of the basic fundings also done via kind of AutoSAR in quotation marks?
No. There is significant interest in AutoSAR in actually getting the problem of being C++ only fixed. So right now for AutoSAR adaptive, it's C++ only because the API is standardized in C++. And if you define a language neutral interface, which WASI or WIT would naturally look like, actually you gain support for Rust, Python, JavaScript, whatever. Go. So you basically get all the languages with a single specification. And this is why it's so interesting. The other one is that, so going with WebAssembly or not WebAssembly here is an interesting choice, because if you don't go with WebAssembly, but go with native, you don't pay any price for additional overhead. So you basically get the, you don't pay for the sandboxing, you don't pay for the copying, you really get a native performance. So no downside, just perfectly nice cross-language modularity. But if you want to go for portability down to microcontrollers, so really running the same binary on a performance controller as well as a microcontroller or whatever across different operating systems, then you actually need a WebAssembly binary. So you just use the same source code and the same interface definition and just compile it to a different target, and then you gain all the benefits of freely being able to move your binaries across the vehicle. That is, of course, very interesting for software-defined vehicles where you just really want to have software you can just freely move inside your car, between your microcontrollers in your car. Or not only microcontrollers, all of the ECUs.
So it's because AutoSAR has the wish to use the standardized data types and execution unit and sandbox on very different ECUs.
I'm just talking for a group within AutoSAR. I cannot talk for all of AutoSAR.
Yeah, fine, just fine. Just wanted to get it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I just see a hand raised, that program.
Christoph, thank you very much for that info. Just a follow-up question. So is AutoSAR talking about using WebAssembly for safety critical systems within the vehicle or for other systems?
I've been talking about that for a long time. So I'm using WebAssembly for safety critical things, and I know that there is significant effort there within the automotive industry. This has been the part of many questions within AutoSAR, but yeah, I would not go that far as saying that AutoSAR is already attacking these or addressing these problems.
Addressing that problem is a fairly substantial compliance overhead. Things like MIRSA or maybe using something like ferrocene, which is already a safety. I'm talking about the runtime itself, for example, is a problem too. Anyway, I'm just super curious. I didn't mean to hijack this conversation.
No, it's fine. This is an open discussion. So qualifying WASM time is one option. There's also the interpreter created by Deutsche Luft- und Raumfahrt, so the German Aerospace Association.
What's the name of that?
Well, they just called it WASM interpreter, if I'm not mistaken, and it's Deutsche Luft DLR. So let me quickly give you the link. And they explicitly state that they care about safety.
This is the competition, Team Whammer, you know.
Not sure about that because it's an interpreter.
Yeah, no, I'm being facetious.
Yeah.
And we are just internally, half internally, half externally thinking about having an ahead of time translation way, very similar to Winch, which is a intentionally non-optimizing compiler. But that's also, so there's a lot of talk going on within the automotive industry about having a way of just running WebAssembly within a certified environment.
And this is where it gets tricky if you want the certification kind of things, and where it takes a long time, usually.
Yeah, it takes time, it takes resources, but nevertheless, there's significant interest, and I feel that there will be a solution at some time in time.
I think this is one of the, also not hijacking, but that's one of the interesting things of WebAssembly because it's mathematically specified. So it makes it easier for certification authorities to get that done. However, you also have the compile tool chains and everything, which kicks in. It's also not that easy. And if we're talking about safety, we're talking about a full-fledged safety, right? So it's not only a bit flip on the CPU, it's also if the sensor is working correctly, etc.
I would actually be much more confident to qualify the binary code of a WebAssembly binary than qualifying native binaries because of the much better understandable and more well-defined binary format. So I feel if you really want to go for, we are really certifying or qualifying the binary instead of the source code. I think WebAssembly is much more easy than any other binary representation. So that might also be an option. So safety is never a one-way street, or no, never a single street. There's multiple options to get there. So there's plenty of interesting sideways, and and the sandboxing, the componentization of WebAssembly, especially with the component model, I'm clearly convinced of the component model benefits for safety. This is just so much additional safety, freedom from interference being granted there that it's too attractive to not use it.
One question, Chris Top. So I wonder, so how the ahead of time compilation and the interpreter can support the component model? Previous, my understanding is they need to do some fusion kind of work. So I assume it is some JIT, but I'm not sure. So so if we need the interpreter, then I'm not sure it is possible to provide a performant kind of a solution for component model because you need so when do every function call, you need to look up the metadata and see what the interface is, and kind of according to the metadata to interpret the function call between components. Then you can imagine how low kind of efficient that will be. So if we don't have such a fusion kind of a technique here.
That should be perfectly possible to generate these things at load time. So whenever you load a new component, you can actually do some housekeeping. And there was also talk about integrating the binaries which are generated by JCO. So JCO is generating some WebAssembly binaries, which is not somewhat WebAssembly with additional superpowers. So with access to the modules it's connecting, and putting that one into a more standardized cross runtime representation of the interconnects between the components by the component model. And this sounds very interesting. I've seen this code and I'm looking forward to it, but I just heard about that there's some talk about this. So I have not seen any prototypes there, but I guess that would be the way to just get this to multiple interpreters. So getting support for the component model, so the interconnect between the components in a standardized way across multiple ahead of time and the interpreters. So basically, it's using the connecting parts, the connecting fabric of JCO in a more portable way.
JCO is for the JavaScript, right?
Yes, yes.
To
It's one of
Yeah,
the two standard implementation for the component model.
Yeah, this is one of the things that sort of I had to wrap my head around a little bit. What JCO primarily does is it takes a WebAssembly component or components, and it converts that to something that is just core WebAssembly. And then that can be run on anything that supports just core WebAssembly. And so the reason why you see this in the browser is the current browser implementations like Mozilla, Firefox, and Chrome and all that only support core WebAssembly. And so that allows you to use like the Node.js engine, which is V8, and the Chrome engine, or the one in Firefox, which is I think SpiderMonkey, to run components, even though their runtimes don't support that yet. So the idea of using this for other runtimes, Whammer, WASI, or whatever, to make them component model enabled might be a really interesting approach as well. So
Yeah,
it's an
that
extra
means that
step you would have to take, right?
yeah, this could be one migration path, maybe
Mhm.
a quite nice migration path. However, we would need to take into concern, or not into concern, we would have to take into account that JCO is doing this for a browser environment, and we are talking about Sapphire, FreeRTOS, Linux, etc. So there's no polyfill, there is no exception handling that comes with some tricks
Absolutely. Yeah.
in it, and this is just where it gets tricky, right? And
This is where people
but
get
the
wrapped
idea
up.
is great. The idea is great.
Yeah, this is where people, myself included, get wrapped up in the terminology, because you'll hear Luke say, we can take the JCO approach and use JCO to do this here. And what he means is exactly what you just said, Thomas. Take those concepts, but not actually, because the current implementation of JCO, to be 100% precise, targets the browser engines.
It's similar to Emscripten, right? There's an
Right.
Emscripten target if you compile to WebAssembly, and this is just not runnable.
Yeah.
Right
So
off the
it probably would
box
not be called
with any other
JCO.
embedding runtime, right? So this
Yeah.
is it's quite similar. We cannot use Emscripten now because we
Right.
just don't need all this JavaScript stuff.
Right. Exactly. And so it would be taking those ideas from JCO and moving them to another project. And who knows, maybe that's a common project and JCO becomes a thin layer of adapting this to the browser versus what it's doing today. I don't know, but Luke has a lot of really interesting thoughts around doing this, because one nice artifact of doing that is it means that you can keep the implementation of the runtimes very small and compact, because they don't have to understand as much, at least from the WebAssembly bytecode perspective.
Right. This
So that
could
might
also,
actually keep implementations smaller, which is important on the embedded side.
yeah, we already talked about a converging path between P1 LTS and P2 plus, let's call it that way, right? And the adapters we have been talked, and we also have been talked about the JCO approach. Then the question is again, who is doing this, right? And who is interested in? And this is something that we don't have a clear picture yet. And I think we must come to a, let's call it a process of how to come to that clear picture.
I agree.
Count me as interested, but I need to jump to the next meeting. So
Yep,
sorry for just
yes,
having.
I was gonna say
to-
we're just we're over. So if there's not any other topics, I thank everybody for their time today. I'm gonna end the call unless there's any objections. Alrighty. Well, thanks
Thanks a
everyone.
lot, everybody.
Yep,
Much
great
appreciated.
discussion
you.
today.
Bye
Yep,
bye.
appreciate it. Okay,
Bye.
cheers. Bye.